Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Craig Dickinson.
And I'm Matt Leader. Today on the show, we are talking about Jojo Rabbit, the 2019 film written and directed by Taika Waititi. Craig, what are your thoughts?
So my first thought is this was the first time I'd actually seen this movie. This was a recommendation by you, and I had wanted to see it. I remember seeing the trailers, and I'd been a fan of Taika Waititi's for a while. Mainly, let's just full disclosure, because of Thor Ragnarok. I just loved that movie, and I'd seen him in some other things. I remember that he was in Green Lantern, even though he wants to forget. And so I was excited to see this because I knew his sense of humor, some of his sensibilities. So I was excited for that. And I also really enjoy clever satire, which this film is very much that. And so I really liked it a lot. And just the whole absurdity of having an imaginary friend that's Adolf Hitler just was fascinating. And I loved it. I thought it was really effective. I thought it was genius and very subversive. So I'm a fan of Jojo Rabbit now. What about you?
I really enjoyed the film, like from the first time I saw it. And my wife is a huge history buff. She particularly likes World War II history. So it was kind of fun for us to both go in, and we both had pretty extensive knowledge of the events surrounding it. And like, not everybody does. I was just having this conversation today in class with, I have a deaf ed student. And so I was talking to the interpreter about what we're going to get into, because Craig and I teach the Holocaust. And we were going through, and she mentioned how, for a lot of students, because she bounces around to different classrooms, obviously, that they don't all get a ton of education in the Holocaust, right? So it's important that we, do a good job of it. And so this is something that, I feel fairly well versed in. And more than anything, I felt like it was just a refreshing take. I was really tired of having just the most depressing things. Mm-hmm. And, it's a depressing topic, and it needs to be, because, you're talking about real events and stuff, but you kind of mentioned the kind of witty satire and humor involved. And for me, just rewatching it again, and especially like in the background, I'm preparing for gearing up for teaching the Holocaust, and you are actually coming to the tail end of it. So it's like, it's just nice to have this refreshing, like a little bit of humor and levity, a little bit of joy, because I do think that ultimately it is a rather joyful film, at least at the end. And that's just, it's nice to see. And we'll get into the details. But I really like the film.
Yeah, I think it is, to kind of build off what you said, it's a triumphant film, right? That you have, it ends on a high note for sure. And you have this journey. We talk about hero's journey a lot, and it is kind of a coming of age hero's journey, Bill Drungscherman, type of film, where you have the major character, Jojo Rabbit, goes through this journey, and we go with him. And it starts off pretty dark with some of the stuff that he's adopting, that he is stating that he believes in, and at least stating he believes in. But by the time we get to the end, his eyes have been opened. And so it definitely leaves you with hope, I think.
Well, and I think that's like the nice thing about it, is that, it's taking a look at these events, and I think it's taking a perspective that's underrepresented, at least in my opinion, from what in my experiences of this, like this kid. And obviously, like, the big part of it is the imaginary Hitler best friend, right? And that's a big part of the satire, but it's very clearly like a manifestation or representation, maybe I should say, of the indoctrination, the propaganda that mm-hmm. he's experiencing as a kid, as a 10-year-old, and he doesn't know any better. But he essentially is missing his father, and he has replaced that figure in his life, that figure of authority, that figure of like someone to lean on, someone to look for advice, and he replaces it with the propaganda. And that's, largely what he kind of experiences. To jump into the very beginning of the film, it starts out with the German version of the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yeah.
Or like that's one of the first. I think they do the Heil Hitler pumping up, right? But then it's like it jumps right into that. And I think that's such an extraordinary way to start the film. First, it just tells you like, okay, this is the kind of movie that you're getting into. Be prepared. And that right there like primes you for everything else that's about to come. But the fact that you know, the Beatles had already recorded this, so it's an original recording in German. And I remember either reading or watching somewhere that Taika Waititi saying that like he was looking back at footage of the Germans and how they reacted to Hitler, and it reminded him of Beatlemania. And so that's where he wanted to start the film off with the Beatles. It's because of this mass hysteria that, you know, people were responding to Hitler in Germany. Not all, of course, but you know, there were a lot of people who got really enraptured by the man in his vision for Germany.
Yeah, I love that quote. I was going to bring that up later, but I'm glad you brought that up now. And that absolutely worked on me. I was like, oh, I see what he's doing. And I think it's, we talk about, I don't know if it's on the nose, but I think it's fitting. I think it's a very clever way of like you said, kind of bringing you in, and it's a little bit goofy, right? It's a little bit lighthearted, but it's also like, oh, I see the parallels that we're doing. And it does very much set the tone of like, these kids are just getting wrapped up and this is exciting. And I feel good about myself when I listen to this music or when I do these chants or when I go to this camp and all this stuff. And so just a great choice of music and footage kind of interspersed with those two things. So that's kind of an interesting dichotomy that you have there. I really did like the opening, to go back just a little bit more, where it reminded me a little bit of the extreme close-ups where he's getting dressed and putting his stuff on. It's that Rambo scene again. He's just getting psyched up for that. I thought that was just a great way to just kind of bring us in, and you get, you're kind of first person sucked into like his excitement. He's strapping on his stuff, and that always kind of makes you feel like you're in the movie too, because you're not really seeing who's doing it. Like if you were tying your shoes, that's the view you'd have. You're putting your belt on, that's the view that you would have. So I thought that was a really interesting way to bring you into the film as well. I really liked composition wise the long static shots, because a couple really interesting ones. This film is a really interesting film to look at. And one I really liked was there's a swimming pool bench where Jojo comes in and talks to Rebel Wilson's in the scene. Who's the other guy that's
Captain K.
Captain K, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Captain K's in there, and there's this ridiculously long bench, and Rebel Wilson slides across it really, really slowly, and it just lingers. It doesn't cut like to a close up between the conversation. It's just this wide shot all the way through.
Yeah, it's got this like office like awkward humor going through it as well.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about exactly. Another moment that like jumps out to me in that is the camera is looking at Scarlett Johansson, who plays Jojo's mom, and she's looking at the gallows in the city center. And you don't realize that at first. It's just her standing essentially in a street, and she's just staring up at something, and it just stays there. And then Jojo comes to visit, and then he's standing on the side. And again, it doesn't cut. It just lingers there.
Yeah, there's another great one too of speaking of Jojo and his mom sitting at the dinner table on opposite ends, and then Hitler sitting in the middle. And it's the wide shot. You see all of them at the same time, and you kind of watch. It's interesting because even though it's his imaginary friend, Hitler almost kind of has the sentience where he's kind of outside of Jojo, where he's watching the conversation between the two of them and kind of his eyes bouncing back and forth. But you can see that. And so I thought that was a fascinating shot. Just anything that linger. And, M. Night Shyamalan movies have this sometimes too, where it's just like this super long cut. And you just like, I know I have to pay attention. I know there's something important here. And it's just, you don't see it that much. We usually see a lot more quick edits, but I'm always fascinated by those long shots.
That, and you have a lot of close-ups of feet.
Yes.
In particular, shoes. And, this idea of like Jojo not being able to tie his shoes. And then obviously his mom's shoes when she gets hanged.
Yes.
That's all you see. You don't see
Yes.
who it is. You're, as the audience member, you're relying on Jojo's reaction and the shoes, which we see several times throughout, which I thought was like a really interesting way to kill a character off.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's set up in that whole scene that I mentioned before, where Scarlett Johansson's looking at the gallows, and Jojo says, what'd they do? And she goes, what they could.
I know, right? What a
And
great line.
yeah. And then, obviously you go off and you get the idea that there's some kind of resistance members and stuff. So like there's a lot of great setup and payoff in the film.
Yeah, and speaking of that, the shot with Jojo's mom's shoes happens right after another really interesting shot where he's following. It's like a first person POV following the butterfly, and so there's kind of like this hopeful, it's transformation and metamorphosis, and he's going through this process, and but the scene shifts so dramatically when he just comes up to the gallows and then you just sees the shoes.
Which is heartbreaking, but it also reminds me a bit of just the color grading.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, where most of the first part of the movie, up until I think the Gestapo come, the color grading is almost yellow. It's very bright, very warm.
Yep.
And then after that, Scarlett Johansson's missing from the film for quite a while. And she's off. Jojo doesn't know where she is. She's out of town. The Gestapo ask about her. And it seems like it gets much bluer, more kind of desaturated, because a lot of the film is very vibrant, very colorful. And you get this kind of desaturated look. I'm thinking particularly of the butterfly scene, but also in kind of the wintry moments when Jojo is like off scrounging for supplies in the trash cans and things like that. Basically, when things are looking the grimmest, it's desaturated, this blue filter. What I found interesting, though, is at the end when Inya, the sister, Thomasin McKenzie, I'm forgetting the character's real name.
Elsa?
Yeah, Elsa.
Yeah.
When she comes out the door after the final victory, right, it goes back to that bright, warm color grading. And so I don't think it was just like the winter months where they kind of cool the image down. I think it's kind of related to how the characters are feeling as far as, how the war is going.
Yeah, I swear you're reading my notes because I had a lot of that same stuff. I noticed that too. It's very soft and golden at the beginning, right? And I just was like, well, this looks like it's an idealized view of the world. He has this very, it's soft and golden and hopeful, and really it's not. It gets revealed that way. That's the way I took it, was when you start to see things like the butterfly in his mom's shoes and his mom has died, and he starts to see the dark side of this thing that he's been involved in that, becomes much more harsh and desaturated with the color.
Well, and along those lines, I think, because, I mentioned earlier that it's just kind of a refreshing film, where I think that like a lot of kind of World War II documentaries and films have a very blue, very desaturated color palette. And, off the top of my head, I can't think of a World War II film that's more colorful, more vibrant than Jojo Rabbit. And I think that's part of it, is you have that moment of just visually, it's more refreshing than a lot of other films that cover the same topic.
Yeah, and I had this down for set decoration, but it's a good place to mention as any, is like the colors of the houses. They're like pastel. And, from doing research and finding interviews with Taika Waititi, like this is how it was, right? We don't see those traditionally in, like you said, in World War II films or in black and white footage, obviously, but it's kind of jarring. You're like, oh, wow, it was a lot more colorful back then. It's a lot more tragic when you think about, the world that these people had, and then it got twisted. And, but I think, as seen through a kid's eyes, that it makes sense that you would be, this very soft and colorful palette that we're seeing.
Well, I think that's actually a great point, in that, you don't think about the world that's colorful. This is a little off topic, but like the Roman Empire, many of the statues were painted. colorful color, like they were bright and vibrant. We don't think of them that way anymore because history's kind of worn down and stuff. But it's that time, I think, is I think people remember it or think about it in muted, desaturated,
Yeah,
because of the black and white films, like you mentioned, the historical film footage, but also things like Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan. They're very
sure.
desaturated, like color grading,
Bleak. Yeah,
very bleak, and
yeah,
that's just how most of us kind of not necessarily learn about the time period, but that's how we end up visualizing it because that's the medium that we get it, our information from. Speaking about set design a little bit too, something that I noticed, one of Jojo's jobs is putting up those posters.
yep.
And already it's kind of an interesting moment when he puts up the poster of Adolf and he swipes it with his hand and it changes faces. Did you notice that?
I think I might have missed that.
So
I'd have to watch it
I
again.
was watching your face and you were like, you did not notice that. Okay. So it's like right after he gets the assign the job from Captain K, and he's out there and he's got like this glue paintbrush and he's putting posters up, and one of them is just a picture of like Hitler's face, and then he kind of wipes it with his hand 2 or 3 times, and each time his face, Hitler's face changes, which I think is just tied to his imaginary friend. But what's interesting is as the film goes on, those posters become more tattered and torn.
Yeah.
And there's a moment right before in the butterfly scene
Yep.
where there's 2 posters and he's like trying to kind of push both of them up and they keep kind of falling down, which is just another visual metaphor for how everything is kind of going.
Yeah, I had that one down there too. We're going to skip around a little bit more, but that's fine because it's a natural extension of what we're talking about. That the pillar right next to it that it's on, the wall is crumbling too. So I look at that as like his world is about to, it's foreshadowing in a sense because he's about to discover that his mom has died and been hung. So yeah, just really gripping. I was like, oh wow, that's not an accident. You see that his world is crumbling that way. Did you have anything else for cinematography, or would you want to
I
move on
think
to?
I think those were kind of my major thoughts. As far as sound, we've already touched on the Beatles. There's a couple pop songs, or at least modern songs throughout the film, and I think it works pretty well for me. I was kind of wondering what you thought about them.
Yeah, I definitely had the Beatles song. There you also get David Bowie's "Heroes" in German at the end, which is kind of fun. I was like, I know this song. Oh yeah, okay. This is David Bowie's "Heroes." Right on. What I thought was interesting was that it's a Michael Giacchino film, and we've done Giacchino before with Rogue One, and I've been a big fan of Giacchino's since Alias and Lost and Fringe and his TV work, and he's done, of course, tons of stuff for the MCU and Pixar and whatnot. And so I feel like I'm pretty familiar with his work, and I would not have known this was Giacchino had I not looked it up. I think it's a very different type of score for him. The main the JoJo has a theme. That's kind of the main thing that he has with this. It's like a 11-minute suite. It's got German lyrics, and I think that's part of it too. Is that there's actually lyrics to the main song, and we hear it a lot throughout the film in lots of different ways, kind of happy and also very sad. We heard at the end, primarily, I think is when I really latched onto it. Kind of when JoJo's looking around and seeing the Allied troops come into the village, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's a really powerful moment." And of course, it's in slow motion, and then that's a very Giacchino thing. If you think back to like Lost and some of those sequences, there's in lots of films. Rogue One has them as well, where you have that very moving, melancholy music and then slow motion visuals kind of paired. But other than that, I was like, oh, it's Giacchino. Okay, that's right on. The guy's apparently more versatile than I gave him credit for.
Totally. I think that for me, the score kind of blended into the background quite a bit. I mean, I was really grabbed by the visuals of the film this time, and that like I've been saying, this doesn't happen for every film, but just visually, it's such a rich film that the score really went to the background for me, other than kind of the pop songs, because they made me pay attention because they're so different, which I think is kind of the point. The everybody's got to live, where Jojo is, scrounging for food, and he's bringing it back to Elsa, who's basically stuck at home. They have that moment when they're both eating, or not. I don't think they're both eating, but Jojo's eating, and then there's like that unicorn that Adolf is eating, and there's just like these little moments of like just absurdness sprinkled throughout the film.
Yeah, he mentioned it earlier. I'm going to go eat a unicorn.
Yeah.
There it is. You're like, what? Oh, yeah. We talked about that. So, performances. We've kind of already alluded to some of them. Taika Waititi, fully committed. Like, sells out.
It's a bold performance.
Bold. Very bold. And I understand that he was like, he tried to shop this film around for years and couldn't get it made because it is so weird and kind of risky, right? But he basically had to promise and commit to, okay, well, I'll play Hitler then, as well as write and direct, and then that'll get the movie made. Because I don't think he's one of those few guys that, well, if you have Taika Waititi playing Hitler, then it's going to be okay that he's kind of goofy.
Yeah,
you couldn't have Gary Oldman do that, for instance, even though he's a great actor. You were like, yeah, he's kind of intimidating.
I think it could have come off wrong.
Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't.
No.
I think he hits the mark for it. As much as I enjoyed Waititi's performance as Hitler, as weird as it all sounds to say, what I love most about it is the progression that it makes. And like I mentioned, how this is kind of like a representation of the education, the indoctrination that Jojo has. But he goes from that like super goofy best friend buddy to angry and mean and hateful. The more Jojo builds relationships throughout the film, the more angry and more hatred you get from Waititi. And it was like, that's such a cool, the inverse relationship between those two things. The propaganda becomes angrier. It tries to grab Jojo kind of by the scruff of the neck and carry him along like the rabbit that he is. And he, obviously kind of, pulls away from that. But I thought that was like the most interesting part of it, was that progression of like going from goofy to the opposite at the end.
Yeah, he's getting desperate. Right. One thing that I noticed right off the bat, and I should have mentioned, I forgot his name earlier, Sam Rockwell, I think is great in the film, but because it looks like he's not even trying. He's at least the first couple times I saw him, like he's so flippant and his accent is so bad.
Yeah.
Like he's not like, you can tell that the character's given up. Like that's kind of his whole shtick, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, I got hurt in this battle and it's stupid that I'm having to be here. And like, he can't even do a decent German accent. Like it just comes through. Rebel Wilson's the same way. She's just like laughably bad at a German accent.
And it like goes in and
guys,
out too.
What's up?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes in and out. Like, well, they'll try a little bit more and try a little bit less. Like,
yeah. So I'm assuming, because they're both good actors, Sam Rockwell especially. I'm assuming that's direction, right? Like just
for sure.
To paraphrase from earlier when he's telling Jojo with his Heil Hitler, just throw it away. Don't even think about it.
Right.
Which is one of my favorite lines. He's trying to psych him up for saying Heil Hitler, and he couldn't do it right. Don't even worry about it. Just throw it away. Don't even think.
Yeah.
That kind of flippant.
I loved Sam Rockwell. I think his character as Captain K is probably the most interesting, along with Jojo. There's something I caught this time that I think Captain K is gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was something in particular, is that he had the pink triangle on his uniform right at the end. I didn't
see that.
Yeah. So he
had that really flamboyant uniform, so I wouldn't doubt that it would be in there somewhere.
Right. And it's fairly small. But when he, as in Captain K and Jojo, are talking right at the end, where Captain K basically saves his life, you see much closer shot. And that's where I was like, okay, it's definitely there. For those who don't know, the pink triangle was one of the designations used in the concentration camps for one of the targeted groups from the Nazis, which were homosexual people. So he had a pink triangle on his uniform, obviously the very flamboyant uniforms. And then Alfie Allen's character the assistant to Captain K. He had pink all over as well. And I didn't
Yeah.
notice if there was a triangle on there, but there was for sure one on
Wouldn't
there.
doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it either. But that also makes it really interesting because Captain K is in one of the categories where the Nazis, you know, had they known, he would have probably been thrown into a concentration camp himself. Yet he's fighting, right? But I also get the impression that he doesn't fully buy into all of it.
Exactly.
Like, obviously, when he helps Elsa and Jojo out with the passport, right? But at the end, you can just kind of see there's this just kind of, it's in terms of his voice and his look and everything, the acting, he's kind of defeated, and he knows what's going to happen to him. And so he's going to do one last final act of kindness for Jojo, looking out for him by taking the jacket off him and pushing him away. And so I thought that was a really good performance by him. And I think that's really interesting, where in terms of the kind of meta narrative, because obviously the film is satire, what is it trying to say? And what I was taken away from it, at least with Captain K, is that, war has more victims than just the people who are killed, right? Obviously, Scarlett Johansson's character is a victim. But even Captain K, he probably would have led a peaceful life and just would have kept to himself and would have been fine, just doing his thing. And he ends up having to do this stuff that he kind of clearly doesn't really care about. Like, he doesn't want to be a soldier. Like, it doesn't look like that. He doesn't seem to care. Like, you know what I mean?
I do.
And I see him as another victim that is not as commonly seen that way in media. So I just thought that was a really interesting performance and character throughout the film.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking how he's in some ways kind of a foil for Jojo, where he's, it's kind of like what could happen. Like he signed up early, or was roped into it, but he's not a true believer. So it's kind of a parallel journey, right? Where you see Jojo kind of losing his faith. You see, here's a guy who absolutely has lost the faith of following, the Nazis and Hitler.
That's a really interesting reading.
The more I think about it, the more I appreciate his performance. Like, it's really interesting, and he's very likable. I think in this film, as much as he comes off as a jerk at the beginning, and I was like, why is he really doing a German accent? What's the deal with this? And then I'm like, okay, yeah, it's very much like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Yep. It looks like I don't want to be in this movie, but really it's I don't want to be, in this part as the
within
character
the world of the fiction.
Within the world.
Yeah.
There you go. This movie is funny. I thought a lot of very funny lines in this movie. Do you have any dialogue samples? Any particular thing that stood out to you as, okay, that's awesome?
Not necessarily a line, but one of my favorite humorous moments was the grenade scene with Jojo at the beginning, where the whole conversation between him and imaginary Adolf, and then he gets all psyched up, like, be the rabbit, and he runs off, and then he and Adolf are running, and you got that slow motion, exaggerated jumping and all this, grabs a grenade, throws it, you just hear the doink off the tree, and it lands. And they're in shit, and they run. And then the explosion, and then you see Jojo fly, and then the kind of fuzzy first-person point of view.
Yeah,
and you see Captain K there, and you see his friend come over, and Yorkie, that
little guy.
Yeah. And he's just he screams, and then imaginary Adolf comes and he faints. And then I think it's Rebel Wilson who's he looks like a Picasso painting. And so that whole scene, I thought that was hilarious. So yes, absolutely. Tons of humor. Couple little lines all within that are all great.
Nice. I mentioned earlier the kind of nonchalant Hail Hitler guys. Hey, what's up? And then there's also it very much reminded me of the doctor scene in Spies Like Us, where they're all saying Hail Hitler. Like, there's 7 of them, and then somebody else comes in, and so they all do another round, which was awesome for laughs. But the line that stuck with me is where you have this budding relationship between Jojo and Elsa, and he's trying to figure out if all the things he's heard about Jews are true, and she kind of plays it off at first, and then he asks her to draw a picture of where Jews live, and she hands it to him, and you don't see what it is first. And he says, "I said draw where Jews live. This is just a stupid picture of my head." And she's, "Yeah, that's where we live." I was like, that's so brilliant.
That's a great line. And that's it. This is a very heartfelt film. That's what I really like. Yes, it's funny. There's some great lines. The whole Gesundheit, where Elsa's like, "You know what I am, say it," and Jojo's like, "A Jew," and Elsa goes, "Gesundheit." Like,
yeah,
great line. Yep. But it's also so heartfelt, where it's this idea of like Elsa is playing along, and she plays along for like quite a while. But really, it's like, even though they may not realize it, they're building this friendship together, and like that really shines through, as the movie progresses. And yes, I don't want to take too much away from what you were saying, but some great lines in there.
Yeah, and I'll just leave it with this: the last line of the film too, which is from the poet Rilke. It says, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final."
Yep,
it's beautiful.
It is. Yeah.
I will say, as far as body language, facial expressions, when they made swastikas with their bodies, that made me laugh so much.
Well, again, that's that absurd humor shining through. Like, it's just so ridiculous that you're like, what even is this? I have to say this, because when I first saw the trailer for this film, I went, "Oh my God," and ran to my wife and showed her. Because I was like, if you haven't seen the trailers for this film, you should, because it's a perfect, absurd comedy. Like, it hits that tenor, other than the kind of positive, life affirming, hopeful feeling, but it hits that absurd humor really well.
Yeah, just amazing. I did want to point out too, with costumes, that you see at the beginning and the end, there's a parallel with Jojo's clothes, where he's kind of got the sickly mustard yellow uniform that the Nazis are all wearing, and then he's wearing yellow again at the end, but it's much softer. As his transformation is happening, you have Elsa in green, like symbolizing new life, I think is the way I would read that. So we already mentioned Klenzendorf, Captain K's ridiculous costume that he sketched out. We got to see a picture of it, then he's actually wearing it, which was kind of a fun payoff.
Fantastic. It's a great costume.
Yeah. All right. Setting design. I already talked about the pastel buildings. Do you have anything else, set decoration or props or anything that you wanted to mention?
Well, I already mentioned like the Captain Cade's uniform, the pink triangle, the posters, propaganda posters. I think that, honestly, like I said before, it's a very beautiful film. I do think the use of fairly unique shoes for Scarlett Johansson, like they stand out as different, was kind of a clever use of something that we may not pay attention to kind of signify her. Just the knife. I think it's Yorkie again during the summer camp scene where he throws the knife and it bounces off the tree and hits the kid. Like, there's even Captain K with the pistol doing different poses and like firing the gun to impress the kids and stuff. So there's some good use of props.
Rebel Wilson's way too casual with the Luger. She's just like flipping it around all over the place.
And speaking of that, at the end, Rebel Wilson, she's talking to a kid. She's like, "You see those Americans over there? Just run over and give them a hug." And then pulls like the pin on a grenade on the strap the back of the kid, sends them off. Like, so there's some great moments.
Just brutal.
Yes.
Should mention the book though, the Yoo-Hoo Jude book. As a prop, right? Yeah. You, especially as he gets to the end and flips through and sees, what else she's drawn, and so you have this. It's kind of this symbol of his transformation as well. That shows his line of thinking from the beginning all the way, to the end. So very important prop for sure.
And I think going off of that into just the characters, that's what I appreciate. I mean, I keep saying it. I think it's a beautiful film visually, but I think that it's so heartfelt, and that's really what like means the most to me. That's why I like it. Um, there's plenty of beautiful films out there that I just don't end up like kind of loving. And I think like the last quote that you mentioned by Rilke, the poet at the end, beautiful, right? But it's really that message of finding life through the tragedies, through the hardships. And part of that, I think, is this idea that Jojo goes on this kind of journey from indoctrinated, crazy Hitler youth kid, and everything that he understands about Jews is completely wrong. I do love the way that Waititi showed that when he first sees Thomason McKenzie's character hiding in the walls. It is shot, and the sound effects and the music is all like horror movie. I want to say that when there's a moment where there's like a creaking sound, like it just sounds like a monster is coming out, right? And so but like it fits his imagination of what he's been indoctrinated to believe about Jews. And you talked about this, the myth of redemptive violence. And this movie is like the anti that. It
Right.
is very much like the redemptive violence does not exist.
Not
Like
at all.
you see that several moments, just like the idea of dancing as freedom, and you know the characters dancing. Scarlett Johansson's emphasis on romance, right, and love being these really important things, and how heartbroken she is that her son is this Hitler Youth fanatic, and she's hiding Jews in her house, and she can't trust him with that knowledge. Um, and what I love most is just the fact that as Jojo builds those relationships, as he gets to know people, as he gets to know Elsa, as he spends time with his mother, when he's talking with his mother about that romance, they're on the steps. And there's like a little cutaway where you see Hitler, and you just see him making this like sour face, like he's upset. But they're just talking about like romance and these relationships, and it's like that's what hatred and bigotry need, is like knowledge of the other is going to erase that hatred and bigotry. Because yes, individuals can be mean and nasty, but that's not what the bigotry is about, right? It's about hating something that you don't really know. The more he knows his mother, the more he knows Elsa, the less he's able to hate them, and the more he's able to understand them. And like that is just such a beautiful message that I can't help but love that.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that was just going back to the shoe tying metaphor that he's been infantilized by his hate, right, and this indoctrination and the propaganda and stuff. And so it's kind of like, well, the people that would work on are people that are so dependent they can't even tie their own shoes. Once you're able to open your eyes and think for yourself a little bit, and then develop some of these more adult skills like tying one's shoes, then you start to break away from that.
I really like that. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's great. And I love that that's the message where it's like, be an adult, you know, be like Scarlett Johansson, where you're willing to work through the tragedy to do something, right? And Jojo's not quite there yet for most of the film, I should say. But I think he realizes and gets there by the end, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. And now I'm thinking now that I think all the characters are German in this, which I think is
Yeah,
also fascinating because
yeah,
even Elsa grew up with Jojo's sister, so she's not from another country that got smuggled in, and Scarlett Johansson's character and Captain K and all these people. So you really do get to see, instead of this, all Germans are the same in World War II, you get to see so many different flavors all going on here. All of these people caught up, like you mentioned earlier about war having all of these victims, not just the people that have died, not just the people on the other side. But it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot more tragic in that way.
absolutely. And I mean, I think that's just I keep saying it, but that's why I love the film.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything else about any of the other actors? I will throw out there that I thought the acting was all great, or the hero's journey, or any other comments kind of about these topics.
No, I think we've covered it pretty well to this point. I do think. I think the performances were solid all around.
Mhm.
Again, some intentional choices, especially on Sam Rockwell and Rebel Wilson. You're going to hire Rebel Wilson. That's what you're going to get. That's what you're looking for.
And it was
You're
a good choice too. Like,
yeah,
it
you're
worked.
looking for ridiculous, right? You're like, yeah, I had 18 kids. All right, for the good job. All this just really silly. Yeah, this is the type of people that would be, fully involved in this, or would be kind of, I'm just going along for the ride. I'm here. I have to do this. The kind of burnout Sam Rockwell character. So, yeah, very well acted, beautiful film, like we've said many times. Edited well, sounds great. It's a really well put together film. Nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah.
Nominated for 6 Academy Awards, one for Best Adapted Screenplay. So, it's definitely a film that I would highly recommend. I think people should check out. I don't always agree with Academy picks, but this would be one that I would say is worthy.
Mm-hmm.
Any other final thoughts from you?
I think I've pretty well covered all of my overall thoughts already. I'll just say that I really enjoyed the film, and I think it's absolutely worth watching if you haven't seen it. I also think that it'd be fantastic to watch in school with kids of the right age.
Yes.
Because you have to understand the satire, but
yeah,
I do think that
high school.
Yes. Yeah. I think it would be really cool to see this film used in a curriculum to explore the absurdity of Nazism and fascism, because when you think about them and explore the ideologies and stuff, they are absolutely absurd. They do not make sense. And I think this film does this with grace and humor, and a visually stunning film.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it really helps get the word out about the podcast. And if you haven't yet, please join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.
And one last thing, our next episode will be a review of David Fincher's Fight Club. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Fight Club, and we'll share them on the next episode.